Imagine you're sitting in a shiny office, waiting to see who will walk in for the biggest job interview of the year. But instead of a confident adult, the door slowly opens, and a tiny little girl with tearful eyes steps inside. She clutches a worn-out folder in her small hands and whispers, "Mom's sick, so I came instead." What happens next will break your heart, change the way you see kindness, and remind you why we should never underestimate the courage of a child. Stay with me until the end of this story. You won't believe what the Millionaire CEO did next. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel Gentle Words for more emotional and life-changing stories that will touch your soul. The conference room was polished to perfection, its glass walls gleaming under the soft golden light. The city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the windows, as though it was waiting to witness something extraordinary. The secretary glanced nervously at her watch, tapping her pen against the clipboard. Because the next candidate for the prestigious executive assistant role at Hartman Enterprises had not yet arrived, and the CEO himself, known for his impatience and sharp judgment, was seated inside waiting. Alexander Hartman, the billionaire CEO whose presence commanded silence, sat at the head of the sleek table. His dark suit crisp, his jaw set with the kind of discipline only years of struggle and victory could carve into a man. His eyes were sharp, unyielding, the kind of eyes that saw through excuses, through masks, through lies. But what he didn't expect on that ordinary Monday morning was a trembling little hand pushing the glass door open. Instead of a confident adult applicant, a small figure appeared, no taller than his desk, dressed in a faded yellow dress that was slightly too big for her frame. Her shoes were scuffed, her brown hair tied into uneven pigtails, and in her tiny hands she carried a folder nearly as large as her chest. The secretary gasped audibly, about to scold her for interrupting, but the little girl whispered, "Excuse me, sir. Mom's sick, so I came instead," and the entire room froze. Alexander raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, while his assistants exchanged confused glances. The girl, no more than 8 years old, stepped forward with the kind of trembling courage that didn't belong to her age. Her voice was small but steady, as though she had practiced this in front of a mirror, whispering to herself over and over again to be brave. "My mom, she was supposed to come today, for the job. But she's too sick to get out of bed. She told me all about this interview. And she said if we don't get it we don't know how we'll buy medicine or pay rent." So, she placed the folder on the table with both hands, her tiny fingers smoothing its edges. "So I came instead." The secretary tried to usher her out, whispering frantically, "Sweetheart, this isn't a place for children." But Alexander lifted a hand, silencing everyone. His piercing eyes locked on the child, studying her the way he studied competitors, looking for truth, for strength, for motives. "What is your name?" he asked after a long, heavy pause. The girl swallowed nervously, straightened her back like a soldier, and answered, "Emily, sir." Emily rose. The CEO leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, an almost imperceptible flicker of curiosity softening his features. Around the room, silence grew thick, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock. Emily's small chest rose and fell rapidly, but her chin stayed high, the way her mother must have taught her. "Never let them see you afraid. And tell me, Emily," Alexander said slowly, his voice deep but not unkind, "why do you think you can take your mother's place at a job interview meant for adults?" Emily looked down at the folder, then back up at him, her big brown eyes shimmering with determination. Because I've watched her. Every night, after her cleaning jobs, she sits at the table and practices typing. She teaches herself on the old laptop so she can be fast and smart. I helped her too. I read out the words while she typed them. I know how much she wants this job, sir. And she says if you want something badly enough, you have to show up for it, even if you're scared. She couldn't show up today. So I did. For the first time, the corners of Alexander's mouth twitched, not quite a smile but something dangerously close. His board members shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to be amused or moved. The secretary, who moments ago wanted to shoo the child away, now covered her mouth with her hand to hide her tears. The room felt heavier, warmer, as though the little girl's words had cracked something inside it open. Alexander tapped his finger against the polished table. His thoughts, usually as precise as a scalpel, betrayed him with an ache he hadn't felt in years. A memory flashed. The image of himself at that very age, standing outside a construction site where his father once begged for work, his mother's tired face reminding him of nights spent hungry. He knew desperation. He knew the courage it took for a child to step into a world that wasn't made for them. Clearing his throat, he gestured toward the chair beside him. "Sit down, Emily." She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Me? Yes. You came for the interview, didn't you?" Her lips parted in awe, then pressed together as she nodded quickly, climbing onto the large leather chair that dwarfed her small frame. Her feet dangled, unable to touch the floor, but she held herself tall, clutching the folder as though it were a shield. Alexander glanced at the folder. "What's inside?" With careful fingers, Emily opened it. Inside were neatly arranged papers. Her mother's resume typed with effort, a handwritten letter explaining her skills, and at the back, pages covered in a child's handwriting with crayon drawings around the edges. Emily pushed the last pages toward him. "These are my notes. I wrote them so I wouldn't forget what to say. I practiced last night." The room, which had been filled with seasoned executives, now watched as a child presented herself with the earnestness of a professional. Her crayon-colored notes had words like, hardworking, fast learner, loyal, needs chance, scrawled in uneven lines, some letters backwards, others smudged. Alexander picked one page up, staring at the crooked words, and felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't remember the last time someone had walked into his company, and reminded him of honesty, of humanity. Emily's small voice continued, "My mom is the strongest person I know. She works 3 jobs but she never complains. She reads books to me even when she's tired. And she says this job is special because it's not just about money. It's about having dignity again. She wants to prove she can be more than just a cleaner. She wants me to see that dreams can come true if you don't give up." Her words fell like gentle thunder, shaking the air with their innocence. The executives avoided Alexander's gaze, some pretending to look at their notes, others blinking rapidly to hide their emotions. But Emily wasn't done. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, and whispered. "She said you're a very important man, sir. She said you can change lives. And I think maybe you're the kind of man who remembers what it feels like to need help." Silence. Pure silence. Alexander sat back, his throat dry. How could a child barely old enough to spell opportunity pierce straight through the armor he had built around his heart? He didn't answer at first, because he didn't trust his own voice. Instead, he took another long look at her. This brave little warrior sitting across from him, fighting for her mother's dream. Finally, he spoke, softer than before. "Emily, your mother is lucky to have you." Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "I'm lucky to have her too." For a long moment, time seemed to stop in that glass-walled room. The mighty city outside kept moving, but inside, a billionaire CEO and a little girl existed in the same fragile truth, that love and courage are more powerful than wealth or titles. And though Alexander Hartman didn't know it yet, that single morning, that single child, would change the course of his life forever. The interview that was never meant to happen stretched far beyond its scheduled time, because Alexander Hartman, a man who usually dismissed applicants within minutes, found himself unable to end this one. Emily sat with her legs dangling from the chair, her small hands folded neatly on the table, answering every question he asked with a mixture of innocence and wisdom that didn't belong to her years. When he asked her what her mother's strengths were, Emily didn't hesitate. She never gives up, even when she's tired. She always finishes what she starts. And she's kind, even when people are mean. When he asked her what her mother's weaknesses were, Emily frowned thoughtfully and said, "She doesn't eat enough. Sometimes she gives me her food and says she's not hungry, but I know she is. And she worries too much, but only because she loves me." The room went still again, and one by one, the executives excused themselves, unable to take the weight of the moment. Only Alexander stayed, leaning forward, his sharpness softened, his mind torn between CEO logic and human truth. He finally said, "Emily, jobs like these are not decided by little girls, no matter how brave. But tell me, what do you want for yourself?" Emily blinked at the question. No one had asked her that before. She looked down at her small hands, then back up at him. "I just want my mom to be happy. She cries when she thinks I'm asleep, and I hate that. I want her to smile again. And I want her to rest. She's always so tired." Alexander's chest tightened, memories of his own mother flickering before his eyes, the way she used to collapse into a chair after double shifts, hiding her hands in her apron so her children wouldn't see the blisters. He cleared his throat and stood, walking to the window where the city glowed in morning light, then turned back to Emily. "What if I told you that I can help your mother? That she won't have to cry herself to sleep anymore?" Emily's eyes widened, hope blooming across her face like the sunrise. You mean, you'll give her the job? Alexander paused, then walked back to the table and knelt in front of her so they were eye level. Emily, your mother will not only get the job, she will get more than she ever dared to dream. But I want you to promise me something. Anything, she said quickly, her voice trembling with excitement. Promise me that you'll keep being brave, not just for her, but for yourself. Because one day, you'll have dreams of your own, and they'll matter just as much as hers. Emily nodded so hard her pigtails bounced. I promise. At that moment the secretary returned with a puzzled look. Sir, the other candidates, should I reschedule? Alexander shook his head firmly. No, cancel all of them, the position has been filled. The secretary's mouth fell open, but she said nothing, retreating with wide eyes. Emily covered her mouth in shock. Really, you mean it? I mean it, Alexander said, rising to his full height again. The authority in his voice leaving no room for doubt. Your mother has the job. And as for you, young lady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. You're welcome in this building anytime. You remind us of what truly matters. Emily clutched the card to her chest, tears welling up as relief washed over her. She whispered, Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving my mom. But Alexander knew it wasn't just her mother he was saving. It was himself too. Because for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him that no business deal or fortune had managed to awaken. Compassion, raw and unfiltered. Later that afternoon, Emily returned home to the small, dimly lit apartment where her mother lay in bed, feverish and weak. Mom, she cried, bursting through the door. You won't believe it. I went to the interview, just like you wanted, and I told him everything and... Her mother tried to sit up, alarm flashing across her face. Emily, you did what? You can't just... But before she could finish, Emily climbed onto the bed and held her tightly. It worked, Mom. He said you got the job. Mr. Hartman said you don't have to cry anymore. He said you'll be okay now. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her daughter back, her hands trembling. Oh Emily, you shouldn't have had to do that for me. You're just a little girl. I'm your little girl. Emily whispered into her chest. And we're a team. Teams don't give up. Across town, Alexander sat alone in his office long after everyone had gone home. He stared out at the city, but for once, the glowing skyline didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a reminder of how many Emilys there were out there. Children carrying burdens too heavy for their shoulders. And though he couldn't save them all, he could start with one. He picked up the phone, calling his legal team. I want her contract drafted tonight. Full benefits, flexible hours, and set aside funds for her medical expenses. Quietly. She doesn't need to know it's from me. When he hung up, he leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Maybe fate had sent that little girl into his office. Maybe it was chance, but either way she had walked in carrying not just her mother's hope, but a piece of his own humanity back to him. The next morning, when Emily's mother arrived for her first official day, nervous but determined, Alexander greeted her personally. A gesture unheard of for the CEO. She stammered apologies, trying to thank him, but he simply raised a hand. You have nothing to thank me for. Thank your daughter. She's the bravest applicant I've ever met. And for the first time in years, as Emily's mother wiped tears from her eyes and Emily grinned proudly at her side, Alexander Hartman allowed himself to smile, not the cold, calculated smile of a businessman, but the genuine smile of a man who remembered what it meant to feel alive. And that, dear listener, is the power of love, courage, and a little girl who refused to let fear win. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel Gentle Words, for more inspiring stories that remind us of the beauty of kindness and hope.